Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Charlotte Business Group's video podcast channel, CBG TV. CBG TV was formed to highlight conversations with successful executives and entrepreneurs in the Charlotte area and gain valuable insight and knowledge from their shared experiences. My name is Robert Hackney, and I'm president of the Charlotte Business Group, and I'd like to welcome my very first guest, Mac Lackey. Mac is an angel investor and serial entrepreneur with multiple eight-figure exits and founder and CEO of The Phoenix. How did you gain credibility quickly in your career?
I think getting started for me, I didn't know any better. I resigned from my very first job to start my first company way back in the first quarter of 95. And I was so driven to create something that I really didn't know what to fear. I just kind of jumped in with both feet. And the advantage that we had was that we were, first quarter 95 was just after Netscape had launched the commercial web browser, and we had this internet company. And so we were so early that the fact that we were able to talk about the internet when most people weren't really sure what it was yet gave us kind of instant credibility. And so I found myself, my early 20s in boardrooms with people in their 50s and 60s because the subject matter that we were talking about was comfortable for us and something that they were trying to figure out. So I got, in a lot of ways, I was lucky to be in that space very early.
Right. Well, how did you gain key partnerships or key executives within your companies?
So I had a co-founder. He and I worked together at our this very first job I had. Actually, he hired me there. He was a self-taught engineer. So when we went off to start the company, it was, Mac playing this kind of sales and marketing role, getting, the word out about what we're doing. And then my partner, Steve, as an engineer who could develop software. So we really started as a partnership, he and I sort of doing the day-to-day work. And over time, one of our great strokes of luck, if anything, was that as we created some momentum, we used every dollar to hire experts. And so oftentimes Steve and I would sit in a coffee shop and say, can you go another month without getting paid?
Yeah.
And we would kind of do that to each other and use the dollars or the proceeds of our projects to hire a developer or a graphic designer or a content expert. And so we really prioritize people, and that helped us not only grow the company, but people would suddenly look at us and say, wow, they have the best team.
Right.
And so that led to more projects and kind of created its own little momentum pretty early on for us.
Right. Well, that's awesome. How did you get funded early on and really execute on minimal cash flow?
Yeah, so a little bit of sign of the times. The mid 90s was it was just building into what people now call sort of the .com boom. So this was really just prior to that. There was not a lot of funding going to early stage companies. We certainly were not in a position to raise significant capital. We started the company with a $10,000 loan from a family member, which was really enough to buy some basic computer equipment and get started. Almost everything else was bootstrapped. Our business cards, we designed them ourselves. We created our own letterhead. We worked out. I had a one-bedroom apartment. Steve had a one-bedroom apartment. We worked, out of our apartments, and so it was what people would now call a garage startup. Really no funding. Really no just you had to sell to live. And I used to always joke around that we had needs-based pricing, and it was we need to pay the light bill, so I need to charge you this amount of money. And so everything we did was survive another 30 days, make it to the next payroll, make it to the next milestone. And we did that for well over a year, just, check to check to check. So after we sold that company and I saw what's possible, which was kind of an eye opener for me, we built the company up from 95. We sold it in 98 to a group that was rolling up companies to take it public. And it was a really, really significant exit. It was an 8-figure exit. So I'm in my 20s, and we had this kind of life-changing experience. But the light bulb for me was how you can create so much value that someone wants to come in and buy it. Because when we started the company, we didn't start it to sell it. We wanted to build this company. And when we saw that, gosh, if we really focus on building value, someone may come along and pay us for it or write us a check. that kind of changed my thinking in that now I wanted to not only do it again, I wanted to do it faster. Because that first company, even though the result was great, it was a grind for 3 years of paycheck to paycheck. Can you make it another month? Let me, at that point I was married and, early in my marriage, and it was like, I'd have to go back to my wife and say, I'm not getting paid again, but, let's keep hanging on. And after that period, it's like, what if we raised capital? We could use the capital to grow quicker, hire people faster. And so that's what we did. We raised money for my second company, which we raised a few $1 million from friends and family, angel investors, and grew it really fast. So it was a different, I learned it in my first one, did it differently in the second one.
Right. When your very first company, what gave you the belief or the mindset of that success was possible, or making that commitment to entrepreneurship? Was there anything in particular that gave you that mindset or that belief?
I would always think I didn't have a pedigree, by most measures. I didn't go to an Ivy League school, got kicked out of my first college. But I did, fortunately, I had parents who were very supportive, that believed in me, that were encouraging. So I did have a huge boost from my family supporting me. I had a young wife who was believed in me and very supportive of becoming an entrepreneur. But I just really felt like even back then that I could prove to myself that I could build something. And I didn't really have any experience to draw on, at least with my first company. I just had this belief in myself and in my business partner that we would figure it out. And, again and again and again over the years, I believe that kind of commitment to the outcome and commitment to doing whatever it took to get there just continued to create this positive reinforcement. Like, all right, I don't know how to do it, but we can figure it out.
Right.
So I think very early on, I was confident that we would figure it out. I just didn't have the answers yet. So,
right.
I guess I would say that commitment and that drive is one of those critical success factors for almost any entrepreneur. Doesn't matter what your pedigree is, doesn't matter what your background is. If you're committed and you're willing to do the work to figure it out, you can create a great result.
Right. Well, you mentioned hiring or bringing on board elite members onto your team. How else do you differentiate yourself, from the competition and the competitors?
Yeah, I think people. 90% of success in my background could be attributed to people. Having the right partners, having the right team members, having the right contractors, having the right investors and advisors, on and on and on. It was people. So that was a huge boost. The other thing that I would say consistently was building a brand and a culture that stood for something, so that when we would, if I'm out talking to people about my company, this product that I'm creating, it was very much driven by the brand and the culture. And we almost always had some purpose, whether that purpose was to do something socially good and high impact, or just honestly, we wanted to crush the competition. It was so cultural for us. It was in our DNA that every conversation we would talk about why we were the best at this, why we could help someone. And I think that just came through in so much of what we were doing, that I really focused on that. And branding has been a really consistent thread throughout my career, where we might have a really small startup, but my logo and t-shirt and business card, I just wanted people to have this feeling that, wow, these people are so serious. It's very professional. It's very polished. And so even when we didn't maybe have the credibility yet to be perceived that way, the brand helped us in the marketplace. That's kind of my view of it anyway.
Right. What, I guess we can look at your first company. What was your biggest mistake in your first company that you made?
Biggest mistake in my first company? I think really early part of my career, almost the first, half of my career, the mistake I made was trying to do it on my own. And some of that maybe was ego. Some of that was unfortunately being in, Charlotte, North Carolina, and not, I'm running tech companies, and there were not a lot of people to look at and say, that's how you do it. Most of the people that I would have considered mentors were more professional mentors, and they were amazing people, but they were not people I could model from a pure business standpoint. And I did not seek those people out. And so I made the mistake of, if nothing else, wasting the time to learn things the hard way versus finding someone and maybe you have already done what I'm trying to figure out. You can tell me in 30 seconds how to do it. Or I can spend a year learning trial and error mistakes, getting punched in the face, figuring it out, staggering back up, doing it again. So I think that is something that as I matured as a business person, I realized that advisors and mentors and people that had already been where I was trying to go was kind of the secret formula. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah. Any other maybe mistakes that you've made in the past or other businesses that have been really helpful moving on and forward?
Yeah, I mean, I've made so many mistakes. I always think about, if you look backwards over 25 years, I have what I would call the highlight reel, right? I started, built, and sold 6 companies. Those were the highlights. But along the way, I made probably a million mistakes. Most of them related to how I wasted time. One of the things that we just talked about, and then I made a lot of people mistakes. I mean, I think it's because people are so important, as you're learning how to hire the right way and manage people, and when you have to fire someone or you have to, transition someone, all of those things, I honestly think I did wrong more than once before I figured it out. And I think in particular hiring, I had this tendency to, my mentor told me one day that you're really good at getting people excited and telling them, why this is such a good opportunity. You're really not good at determining how they can help you, which is the point of you hiring them. And so right. I finally figured out, I really need to spend this interview figuring out how you can help me or my company or our vision. And so my wording and interview style changed over the years, but it took me a long time. I made a lot of mistakes hiring people that I would leave the meeting really excited because I was getting them all fired up and they were fired up, and then we would, hire them and I'm like, they don't have the skills I need. So I learned that the hard way. Probably one of my bigger mistakes.
Yeah. Well, how did you deal with failure early on?
I think failure is such an important part of business, and unfortunately, overly stereotyping Southeastern United States had a little bit of a culture of, failure being bad. In Silicon Valley and other places around the country, failure is almost embraced because that means you're just learning faster and you're, figuring things out. Serial founders often would talk about their first 3 or 4 companies being failure, and therefore I'm going to be able to do this great thing. And in Charlotte, that always struck me as like, man, I don't ever want to talk about my failures because nobody's going to want to support me. But the reality is, I failed at a lot of things. I failed with that first company. We had a great exit. I failed to listen to smart advisors, and we went into the .com crash. 90% of my net worth was in public tech stocks, because I didn't listen to anyone. And I think I just really would, look at failure as a way to learn. And I was always okay with that, pick myself up and like, all right, that was a hard lesson to learn. Some of those, none of them were death blows is right. The way I sort of like, worst case scenario, it was unfortunate. I lost a lot of money. I lost a friendship. I lost a product. I lost a customer, whatever it is. But how do I look backwards and say, what was the lesson I need to take away from that and apply it so I don't do it again?
Right.
And I've had a lot of those, but generally speaking, after learning the lesson or having the failure, I don't do that thing again. I'll make some other mistake, but not that thing,
right.
And so I think I spend a lot of time, I'm human, right? So I still take it hard sometimes, like, man, I really whiffed on that thing, or I made a huge mistake, but I just try to remind myself constantly that that's how I learn.
Right.
That's how I get better.
Right. Well, and some of your posts and your content on social media, through Phoenix Digital, you mentioned kind of the Black Swan events.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe outside of those, what's been maybe some of the most unexpected events, when building your businesses?
Yeah, I mean, Black Swans are really, it's a term, that was coined many years ago for these unexpected, unforeseen things that happen. Those are generally macroeconomic things out of our control, right? So 9/11, the .com bust, the financial crisis, COVID-19, things that just really come out of nowhere and they create these unexpected consequences. But, there are also business things that they're still sometimes not in your control. But, for example, I've had, investors who had committed to do a deal pull out in the 11th hour. And if you are assuming or running the business as if you're going to get that money and all of a sudden it's gone, the chances are, you have made a lot of decisions as if you've already had the money. And I've done that. I've had, people quit or, someone decides to just up and move or change. And all of a sudden you realize how much of your day-to-day operations depended on that critical role. And so a lot of things, early in my career, again, sort of I think about my career in almost like two pieces, like the first half and the second half. The first half was the first time I experienced almost every one of those things. The second time it was deja vu. It was like, oh yeah, I know when someone tells me they're going to leave, I know exactly what's getting ready to happen. And so I was able to become much more proactive. And not that I'm a paranoid person, I'm not at all. I'm a huge optimist, but I also stress test everything in my mind. What if Robert just decided to leave tomorrow? What if Robert got hit by a bus, God forbid? How would I react to that? What if my biggest, customer left tomorrow? What if? And just asking those what ifs almost always creates a series of steps that I could take to mitigate the risk. So I'm much more proactive now in dealing with those things.
Yeah. Well, Mac, what is one thing that you find to be true that most people would disagree with?
Yeah, I love that question. Peter Thiel, right?
Yeah.
That's such a good question. So I would say there's two or three things that I fundamentally disagree with. I actually blogged about this very recently. 3 of the biggest lies that entrepreneurs are told. And one is that hustle is the answer to success. And I think a lot of people, there's a whole category now people call hustle porn. And the king of hustle porn, Gary Vaynerchuk, who I love. I mean, I think he's really smart, much more successful than me. So I don't want to overly slam Gary V. But it's really easy to say, just really work hard, put in the time, Robert. One day you're going to be successful. And that doesn't mean you're working smart. It doesn't mean even if you work hard, you're actually going to be successful. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs believe that that's the answer. You just put in 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week and hustle and you'll get there. And I fundamentally disagree with that.
Right.
So that's a big one for me. The other one that's probably even bigger, which led to the formation of the Phoenix, which is this platform I'm building now, is that you will be told and are told as an entrepreneur that you have to accept certain trade-offs. If you're young in your career and you're starting a company, people will say you need to go ahead and get ready. Your relationships are going to struggle. Your spouse is going to have to understand. Your kids, they'll be okay, but you're not going to be at every baseball game. You're not going to be able to be their soccer coach because you got a business to build. And you can travel one day, but not now, because right now you need to be heads down building your company. And I think almost everyone buys into this. And I, again, fundamentally disagree. As a matter of fact, I think the opposite is true, which is if you want to be really successful as an entrepreneur, you have to decide right now not to accept the trade-offs, because the result of that is where all of the creativity and the smart strategies come in. I had a very specific moment in my life in August of 2000. I had just sold my second company in July. My daughter was being born in August. I decided that I was not willing to accept the trade-off that everyone was telling me I had to accept, because I, in my mind, wanted to be the kind of father that was having dinner with my kids every night at 5 o'clock and coaching their soccer teams. But I knew that I was working, 80-hour weeks. I was sleeping on the floor in my office. And I was like, how does this work? The minute I decided not to accept the trade-offs, suddenly I had to get really creative. How is it that my business runs and I'm home every night at 5 o'clock? How is it my business runs and scales and I leave at 2 o'clock to coach the soccer practice? And I found out very, very quickly that because of that decision, I actually became better at building a business that scaled, and a business that scaled without me, to the point that as I know you personally know, but later in my career, I was running companies. I pulled my girls out of school and traveled to 14 countries. I traveled the world. I picked up my family and moved abroad, all while running companies that were continuing to scale. But it's really because I refused to accept those trade-offs. So in that question, I think that's one of those things most people will say, you not only have to accept the trade-offs, probably multiple trade-offs.
Right.
Your health's going to suffer. You can't travel. You need to spend less time with friends and family because you need to be heads down building your business. And I think the opposite is true.
Right.
The more you focus and commit to those other things, the better you create a scalable business. So that's a big one.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned strategy over hustle. Is there an area of strategy or kind of to get your mindset into a strategic vision that can help kind of transition away from that hustle grind to being more strategy or strategic?
Yeah, I think there are a few categories that I tend to find. I mean, of course, every business is unique, but one huge piece of leverage, of course, is in having the right people. So if you have the right people, you are automatically putting people that are really better than you at certain things in a position to be successful, which reduces the time and energy you have to do it. Systems are huge. So if you can automate processes in your business so that you can insert, technology or tools or systems so that it's not a manual process, you get a lot of leverage on that. But I would say the biggest one to me that I think about almost every day of my life is distribution. How do I take an idea or a product or a service and get it to the world in a very efficient way? Because what most people do is they think, all right, well, I need 1,000 customers. How many phone calls can I make a day? And if I hire another person, I can make half the calls and this person can make half the calls. And they start doing this kind of linear math. And mine is, how do I find someone who already has those 1,000 customers and do a deal with them so I have them right now?
Right.
And over my career, I have, not always perfectly, but I have done that again and again, where I've created a product or a service and I've kind of hit pause and I go out to the market and say, where's the distribution? Where can I find someone or a group that can take my idea and product and service and just blow it out? And there's so much leverage in that.
Right.
And people, to this day, I'm amazed how many people will not take the time to think about that. And they just run these linear models of hours in the day times phone calls you can make times marketing spend. And it's like, that works, just takes you 10 times as long to get there.
Right.
Versus the one deal or the 2 or 3 deals that have all the distribution associated with them. So that's probably the biggest thing when I'm working with founders and I'm mentoring, advising people, is where is the leverage in your business? And a lot of times it comes from people, systems, or distribution. Those are probably the big 3.
Right. Is there an example of a member of the Phoenix that you could relate that to that has valued
Yeah, well, I would say in my own, I'll give you an example from one of my own companies, which is I had a soccer-focused technology company called Kick. And this company, we believed, had the technically superior product solution in the marketplace. But I had competitors. Some of them were really big. One of my competitors ended up being NBC Sports, which a division of NBC had 80 engineers. I had one, and they had 50 salespeople. And I had one at the time on my way to 2. And so here I am with what I think is a better solution, but thinking to myself, I have to be able to outsell 50 full-time salespeople, and I have to be able to out-engineer 80 engineers. Seems impossible. And at the time, there were about 9,000 youth soccer clubs in the country. And so you could do the math. How many phone calls, how many times? And I went out and I found a group that was actually providing a completely different solution to soccer clubs, which were player cards. And without going into the detail, this one group had 3/4 of the clubs in the country using them for these player cards. So I went to the CEO and the board and said, what if we built a modern digital version of your player cards and we put it on our platform? And once we went through that negotiation, they agreed to do it. Literally 24 hours later, 3/4 of the soccer clubs in the country were on my server.
Wow.
And so now all I'm doing is adding my little solution to what they're already using. So I'm upselling versus cold calling or trying to do the math. And so And I did a few deals like that where we sort of overnight became the largest, or at least we had the potential to become the largest. And subsequently, NBC Sports bought our company because they wanted that distribution.
Right.
So I think, that's a good example. And in a lot of ways, the Phoenix, which is this entrepreneurial platform I'm building now for this exact reason, to help earlier stage, high growth entrepreneurs find the mentors and experts and advisors to do these things. It's the exact same thing I'm doing now. It's like, all right, well, the Phoenix, I think, is a transformational program for entrepreneurs. But if I have to literally email and call every single entrepreneur to find them to join the Phoenix or go to our trial and see if it's a good fit, it would take me the rest of my life. If I talk to you and say, hey, you have a great platform, you're already speaking to, I don't know how many, a lot of entrepreneurs, maybe my message goes out through you. Even in this conversation, there are more people seeing and hearing about how the Phoenix might be the solution to their problem than I could possibly pick up the phone and call or email. Right. So even doing this is a good example of the kind of distribution you should be thinking about for your own platform, which is what I'm doing for the Phoenix.
Right. Well, great. Well, you mentioned, mentors in the past. Who are the three people that you have had the most influence, on you?
On me. I've had a long time mentor who's a world-class individual named Dow Balknight. Hopefully he doesn't mind me mentioning his name. I started working with Dow. He was a investor in one of our early companies, and I got to know him. And the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that he was one of those individuals that I felt like every time I talked to him, I was getting smarter. And not only was I getting smarter and learning something, I would leave a meeting with him, whether it was a cup of coffee or an official meeting, energized. And it just sort of dawned on me that that's what a meeting was supposed to be. Like, I'm not supposed to leave frustrated or confused. I'm supposed to be learning. So he was the first person for me that I had the formal shift from what I would call a mentor that I was, maybe I called him my mentor, but I had never asked him to be my mentor. So he was the first person that I took that sort of formal step to say, I would like you to be my mentor. Here's what that means to me. Here's how I would like it to work, and really kind of made the ask. And he accepted, and we, a lot of years, he played roles of advisor, investor, friend, shoulder to cry on, swift kick in the butt when I needed one. He would tell me, he's such a world-class individual in terms of morals and ethics, but he would look me in the eye and tell me something that I needed to hear that most people wouldn't do. Because as you create more and more success in life, one of the risks is the people around you become yes men, or they're just really, oh, that's a great idea, Mac. Like, it's not a great idea. You need to tell me that sucks, And I didn't have enough people in my life doing that. So he's one that stands out for sure. My longtime business partner, Ross, we were co-founders of companies. But what's cool about Ross is, and we had an amazing partnership and still do to this day, but we started out as friends. And I knew he was 2 years older than me in high school. And too long of a story, but I got pulled up to play varsity soccer when I was 5 feet tall, weighed about 100 pounds. And I was a little kid by every measure, playing up at a school that basically had a stated, like, we don't allow sophomores to play varsity. And I got pulled up, which was great, except for it pissed everyone on the team off. And Ross was the team captain and a senior, and he took me under his wing. And the way he treated me as a young kid when he had no reason to do that made such an impression on me that as we kind of moved into, post-college and life, he was a CPA, I started leaning on him for advice in things I didn't understand, like finance, right? He was a CPA. He was very smart in that. But the thing that was so critical is I trusted him, and we had that type of relationship where I just felt like he had my back, and hopefully he felt like I had his. But that led to such a powerful friendship and partnership over the years that I attribute a lot of success to, having Ross as a partner. And then, I think my parents, in a lot of ways, I'm an only child. My mom and my dad played very different roles in my upbringing, but just the fact that I had their kind of unwavering support, and then that, sort of continued and then added my wife into that equation of like, when you're an entrepreneur, you're going to get punched in the face. I mean, it is going to be awful. And if you have a natural tendency, which I do, to take things personally, like I failed, I let that person down, I didn't do this right. Sometimes you need those support, people around you to be like, you know what, you're working hard, you're doing the right thing, keep at it.
Right.
And so I've been really, really blessed and fortunate to have, parents and a spouse that allowed me to do that, while also, my spouse, my wife, she will also tell me like, yeah, you need to work harder. You need to pick it up. I mean, she's really good at telling me what I need to hear. So
Great. Well, Mac, what advice would you give someone, wanting to pursue a career in entrepreneurship?
I would say probably one of the single greatest decisions of my life was choosing to be an entrepreneur. I don't regret it. I would encourage people to do it, 100 times out of 100. I think it's one of the smartest things you can do. But it comes with a lot of challenge. And the way you can mitigate that challenge is through mentors and advisors. I mean, that's probably the single biggest factor, is whether it's, and it can be multiple aspects of your journey. It can be basic business. It can be the specifics of your industry. It can be morals and ethics. Whatever it is, you should be rolling the tape forward and looking 3 years, 5 years down the road. Where do I want to be? And who has already been there? And if you can find people that have already been where you're trying to go, it is such a powerful strategy to mitigate risk, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes and they can help you avoid them. But also the shortcuts. I always think about summiting a mountain. If you're going to climb Everest, you can buy every book and you can watch all the videos, you can do all those things, you can train really hard, and you will find out a way to summit Everest if that's your commitment. Or you can talk to someone that's already been to the top and say like, how did you do it? And they're going to tell you, don't use the North Face, go up the backside. Don't use this Sherpa, use this crew. Don't use these kind of ropes, use these kind of ropes. It is night and day just because you're talking to someone that's already done it. So I'm a huge, huge believer in advisors and mentors, and particularly finding those that are going to show you how to get where you're trying to go. And that's, again, big, huge motivation for me at this point in my life, was trying to build out for other people, because I didn't have it as much as I wish I would have as a young entrepreneur.
Right. What's one question maybe that I missed that you'd ask yourself if you're in my shoes?
That's a great question. One question that I don't get asked a lot is, if you could start over, what would you do completely differently? Part of the answer would be in that vein of advisors and mentors. But the other is, oddly enough, I would take more risk. I think, you hear this when you interview people on their deathbed, which is a morbid view. But if you interview people kind of the last moments of their life and they look back and talk about regret, and it's almost always not trying enough things, not taking enough risk. And thankfully I still feel like I'm relatively young, but I already look back and think, gosh, I could have amped up the risk. I could have, because, and this is a really important caveat, the risk is such a misconception, because the failure associated with it is where people get thrown off. It's like, if my businesses would have completely failed, I'm not a failure. My wife doesn't leave me. My kids aren't gone. I don't lose everything I have. That business failed, but I learned something so valuable. But what if it is successful? It would have multiplied my impact, multiplied my, fill in the blank with whatever you care about. So I look back and think, I was really cautious early on. And even later in my life, the name The Phoenix came from my mentor. Crazy enough, I was sitting with him, this is probably 2 or 3 years ago, sharing that I was concerned about taking risk at this point in my life, because I've been successful, and what would it do to my resume if I had a huge failure after having some success? And he smiled and shared the story of the ancient Greek, the phoenix rising from the ashes. And he said, that's what is going through my mind, is you need to be the phoenix. You need to, every time, you need to burn down all those worries and beliefs and just keep rising. It's like, man, that is such a powerful concept. Like, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can always rise, right? And you can always come back. And so I think for me, people don't ask me a lot, about that, like risk. And oddly enough, because people will look at it and be like, oh, Mac took crazy risk. He was an entrepreneur his whole life. I could have taken a lot more. And I hope that now I will continue to put myself out there and take risk, because it's it's a gut check still. I mean, I'm still like, I don't know how to do that. Maybe I shouldn't do it. That's your human psychology kicking in. But I know as an entrepreneur, that's where I really create results and where I learn is taking those risks. So that's probably a big one.
So when you mention risk, is there a specific area of the business that you would take more risk in, or a specific industry, or another venture in particular?
I think probably across the board. I mean, just like applying risk to a lot of different things, like trying something a little bit bigger, trying to do something a little bit faster. All of those things have some risk associated with it. But the biggest is your own ego, your own, when you try something new, whatever it is, your human psychology, or at least mine, is telling me like, oh, you don't know how to do that. You're going to make yourself look like an idiot. Don't say that, because you might be wrong. And that's my, my brain telling me to tamp it down, when what I really should be telling myself is, who cares?
Right.
Why does it matter? So I'll give you a perfect example. When I sold my last company, October 2018, I exited my 6th company. I kind of felt like it was probably my last exit, because I really wanted to shift into helping other people and spending more time in the second chapter of my life being a mentor and advisor. And in order to do that, I had to promote myself for the first time. I realized that there were all these people that are gurus out there on the internet that are, building these great companies. And I'm looking at them thinking, man, they're amazing. And then you look into their backgrounds, they've actually never built a company. They've never done any of those things. They're just really good at social media. So I was like, all right, well, the good news is they have no experience, but they have 1 million followers. I need to figure out how to promote myself online. Great, no problem. And then I get in front of a camera and I'm like, I don't know how to talk about myself, and I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do social media. So my natural tendency would be to rein all that stuff in and be like, I'm going to look like an idiot. Here I have this decent looking background and resume, and the last chapter of my life, I'm going to look like a moron trying to get out on social media. I'm too old for that. And then I'd convince myself nope, that is me trying to reduce risk. I should be upping the risk. I should figure out how to do social media, look like an idiot, because that's how I'm going to end up getting to where I want to be. That's how I'm going to end up helping more people. If they don't know that the Phoenix exists, or they don't know Mac Lackey could help them or advise them or mentor them, I'm not doing anybody any good. So it's, to this day, I still fight that, because I think it's human psychology telling you don't take risks, kind of rein it in. You're going to look like an idiot. People are going to laugh at you. You're going to forget to hit, record, and you're going to be talking for 20 minutes. And, so all of those self-talk things, I have to still remind myself, that's where you have to take risk.
Right. Well, for those in the audience that may not be familiar with the Phoenix, can you just touch on that, one more time?
Sure. Yeah. So one of my real motivations after selling my companies was trying to help others. And I wanted to do it with a very, very structured, I didn't want to do it kind of haphazardly, one coffee here, one conversation there. I wanted to bring all the resources I could to it. So I built really 2 platforms. One is called Exit DNA, which is, exitdna.com. It's basically, if you're an already successful entrepreneur, define that as 7 figures, 8 figures, and you want the option to sell your company in the future. I've been through that process. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've really learned how to create a model to help people do that. So I created that program. Well, I was getting rave reviews. People loved it because, again, it's just me sharing some really, really from the trenches experience. But what I realized is that was for a tier of entrepreneur that most people haven't achieved yet. And my programs were relatively expensive because I'm putting a lot of resources into them. So if you're a 7, 8 figure entrepreneur, it's great. But what if you're just getting started? Or what if you're 6 figures? You're doing a couple $100,000 in revenue, or 100,000, and you want to be a 7 figure. You want to be an 8 figure. So I looked at it and said, well, all of the stuff I've invested in Exit DNA, this whole platform, the experts I bring to the table every month, the live sessions I'm doing, I could do those for a much larger group of people and just leverage the investment I made in this platform. So I took everything I built for Exit DNA and I kind of replicated it and created a platform called the Phoenix, which is THEFENX, and thephoenix.com, so that I could help entrepreneurs with those exact same things. But instead of being, $1,000+ a month for some of these masterminds in Exit DNA, it's a very low cost. It's $99 a month after a $1 trial. So it's a really, really affordable way for entrepreneurs to get access to not only me, I mean, I'm on it every day, but all of my experts, my advisors, my CPAs, my design experts are all a part of the platform. So it's really trying to bring that whole community to bear for entrepreneurs. So that's something I'm really passionate about. I'm just getting it going, but yeah, that's kind of what it is.
Well, so Mac, I want to thank you for joining us today, being our very first guest on the very first episode of CBG TV. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And we hope you'll join us again in the future.